This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, the podcast where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. It's great to have you with me. My name's Stephen Mansfield. Let's get to it. One of the fundamental assumptions of this podcast, because it's one of my fundamental assumptions, is that in order to understand our times, and certainly to understand history, you have to understand religious forces. Even if you're not religious yourself, even if you'd call yourself an atheist, even if you think all religion is folly, the fact of the matter is that people are religiously motivated. Countries, nations are religiously motivated, and you have to understand those religions in order to understand our times. This has been, by the way, a fundamental flaw of the American government, because the American government tends to be sort of loosely Christian, religious, Judeo-Christian, has chapel services, has religious services, but not deeply religious, believing that the First Amendment keeps government from being too religious. Often this translates into how we look at the world, what we understand of what's going on internationally, and we tend to look at it in terms of secularism, in terms of natural forces, in terms of non-religious motivations. Again, even if you don't believe in anything supernatural, the fact is other people do. So if you're going to contend in the Middle East, if you're going to understand India, if you're going to understand what's going on in the world, you have to understand religious forces. Well, that brings us to the United States' current conflict with Iran, which, though we're not hearing much about it, is deeply about religion. So let me give you a flyover. I can't get down on the details here too much, but let me just give you a flyover so you understand what's happening in our headlines. And those of you who are listening who work in D.C., maybe you'll understand a little bit of the challenge before us and make wise policies regarding this. There are approximately 2 billion Muslims in the world. The vast majority of those are Sunni Muslims. These tend to be a bit moderate. These tend to believe in leadership of the Muslim community. Obviously, they look to Muhammad. Obviously, they look to Quran. Obviously, they look to the Hadith. You can look up what those words mean. I won't break them out now. But they are the vast majority of the Muslims in the world. About 10% of those 2 billion are Shiite. And they are slightly different. They believe in a different lineal ascent from Muhammad, that the Islamic leadership should be actual family members descended down from Muhammad. They tend to be more mystical. They tend to be more apocalyptic. They tend to be more, how can I say this? I think we'll just leave it at mystical, okay? Now, there are branches of Sunni and Shiite. I want to make it very clear that Sunni and Shiite live quite happily and together in lots of the world. For example, a lot of my experience has to do with the Kurds. As you know, if you listen to this podcast on a regular basis, I work very closely with the Kurds. And in Iraq, for example, Sunni and Shiite, especially among the Kurds, live together very well. It's not assumed, it's not inherent that Sunni and Shiite do not get along together. However, when Shiite gets inflamed, especially by some of the extremist Shiites, you begin to have the kind of problems that we've had, for example, between Iraq and Iran, and particularly Iran today. In 1979, there was a Shiite extremist revolution in Iran. The Shah was deposed. The Ayatollah Khomeini took the lead. And you need to understand that a version of Shiite Islam began to take the ascendancy in Iran. It's in the West, it's often called Twelver Shiite Islam. Twelver for 12, the number 12, Twelve, Twelver Shiite Islam. And to make it very simple, there is the belief in this branch of Shiite Islam that there were 12 imams that descended from Muhammad, and the 12th became a thing they called the occultation happened. This 12th imam lived forever and became invisible, went into hiding. And he has lived ever since. Now, this is a person And there are different views of this, of course, but this is a person they call the Mahdi or the Ascendant One. There are various names for him, but we're just going to call him the Mahdi or the 12th Imam, because it is he that the 12er Shiites believe is invisible now to mankind, will return, will produce the ultimate Islamic government of the world. Okay? And this will come about, by the way, this Imam will appear in a time of great apocalyptic upheaval and violence. The word apocalyptic is not a uniquely Islamic word. It's also used in Christianity. The book of Revelation is often called the apocalypse. It comes from the Greek word apokalypto, which means revelation or unveiling. And so all that to say that you have a belief system amongst 12er Shiite Muslims that the 12th Imam will return. The word that's often used is the Mahdi during a time of great apocalyptic upheaval and violence and so on, and will then rule the world. Okay? Now, this is the belief system to various degrees amongst the leadership of Iran. Iran is a Shiite state for the most part. It is led largely by these 12er Shiite Muslims. And there is a belief system that Iran is meant to usher the way in for the Mahdi, and that this will happen in great violence, great chaos, great upheaval. And in fact, the United States and its violence and its opposition to Shiite Islam, this is now are these 12er Shiites talking, not me. It's actually confirmation of the Mahdi coming. The U.S. is playing its satanic role in opposing Iran and opposing the Mahdi and opposing even the chaos and violence and upheaval that's meant to happen before the Mahdi returns. I need to say quickly that that's been going on for generations. In fact, Winston Churchill engaged in a war when he was a young man before he was in British politics, when he was in the British Army, and he was in a war against the forces of the Mahdi. Someone in Northern Africa had proclaimed himself the secret Imam, the one returning, and as a result, there was a great war and great violence. He developed a great distaste for Islam from that highly mystical Shiite, Mahdi-oriented kind of Islam. So all that to say that that's what you're dealing with today. And so here we are now. I'm sitting here a few days after Easter 2026, and Donald Trump and his administration have engaged in a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, the assumption being that they can negotiate themselves to a peace. Now, I'm not a warmonger, and I'm not bloody, and I don't want to see all Muslims die at all. Again, I'm an advocate for the Kurds, one of the most outspoken advocates in this country for the Kurds, who are 95% Muslim people. So to say that Mansfield's anti-Muslim is crazy. However, I believe that our State Department in particular, our nation as a whole, for the most part, tend to look at history and current events through a secular lens. So we think it's all about oil. We think it's all about power. We think it's all about just natural forces. The fact of the matter is that the clerical leadership of Iran are people who believe it is their job to stir up chaos and violence in the world and to oppose the United States, the great Satan, so that the lesser Satan, Israel, is empowered. In other words, the great Satan supports the lesser Satan, Israel. But that Iran's job is to stir up violence. Iran's job is to push for jihad. Iran's job is to be a part of the apocalyptic events of our time in preparation for the Mahdi to return. So U.S. negotiators are going to talk about oil and the Straits of Hormuz and terrorism and Hamas and Hezbollah, and they're going to talk about all those kinds of military, natural, even geological, geographic forces. And that is valuable. That's how statesmen need to talk. But in a conversation with the leadership of Iran, you're going to be talking to a religious extremists who have apocalyptic visions Western diplomats barely understand. For example, one of the groups that is supporting Iran are the Houthis in Yemen. And part of the reason is that the prophecies regarding the Mahdi are that support will come from Yemen, Well, the Houthis have embodied that. That's why they're firing their weapons into Saudi Arabia and engaging in violence there. That's why they have tried to dominate Yemen. That's why they're firing at American planes, et cetera, et cetera. It's because of prophecy. It's because of religion. It's because of beliefs. If everybody sat down at a table and they were just rational on a secular basis, you might make some progress on negotiation. You'd assume, as we often do in our negotiations, that fundamentally people want to live happy lives. Fundamentally, they want to take care of their children. Fundamentally, they want to have enough food to eat. They want to drive their cars. They want to watch their televisions, and they want to, have a prosperous life. And war and violence and lack of trade are opposed to all of that. So let's sit down and rationally settle. That's how the West thinks in its diplomacy. But often we're dealing with people who aren't thinking that way. It's not how communists think. It's not how radical Islam thinks. It's not how radical Hinduism thinks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're not sitting down and negotiating with people who are just trying to figure out the most equitable way for everybody to share resources and for everybody to have a prosperous, materialistic Western life. That is exactly how we think. That's not what's going on. You're going to be talking to people who certainly want to preserve their nation, but they want to preserve their nation as a tool of the Mahdi, as a tool of the apocalypse, as the tool of an end times. Yes, a phrase they use. Some Christians will recognize that language. An end times kind of upheaval that ushers in the Mahdi. So this is what makes it very difficult to negotiate with people like this, and particularly to negotiate with Iran. So here's my caution. My caution is that if the Trump administration, in its zeal for a deal before the midterms, which is how Western politics works, here's Iran dealing with apocalyptic, historic Mahdi returning of the 12th Imam, Allah showing up and empowering the nation and taking over the world. That's how they're thinking. And Western diplomats are thinking, let's see if we can get a peace deal here before the midterms, which Republicans are very concerned about losing, or as Obama said so graphically when he got whooped in the midterms, having their backsides handed to them. Well, that is likely to happen in the midterms. And sure, it will help Republican fortunes if there's not a war going on or if a peace has been settled or negotiated. But the problem is that we are often trying to negotiate materialistic Western, we'll guarantee you prosperity, we'll make sure that you have Snickers and television screens kind of negotiations, when other nations are about massive apocalyptic, mystical, end times, return of invisible Mahdis who have lived for centuries out of sight kinds of themes. So the Trump administration needs to be very, very careful in its negotiations. You can set in boundaries, you can get commitments, you can position military forces to keep Iran in check. But if you're expecting the clerical leadership of Iran to negotiate a peace based on Western values, you're expecting what never will be and never has been. And that's why we've been bedeviled by Iran since 1979. We should have done something back then. We're doing something now, even though we're doing it clumsily. And again, I'm not a person who wants to see all Muslims die. I'm not a person who's a warmonger and wanting bloodshed. But I am a guy who believes in realism. I believe we ought not deceive ourselves. I'm a Christian realist in my foreign policy, and I believe we need to be wise and recognize that Iran is not trying to negotiate for more McDonald's, bigger TV screens, and lots of Snickers in the stores. I'm just using that as an illustration because it's my favorite candy. We are in a dangerous time. Trump wants a deal. He wants one now. He considers himself the master of the art of the deal, the title of his famous book. And Iran is going to keep the plate spinning as much as they can because they're looking for the return of their messianic Mahdi. And this is where Western diplomacy, and particularly American diplomacy, often fails. The State Department does not take religion seriously. But religion is what is inspiring Iran, what is inspiring 12er Shiite Islam, what is inspiring the Houthis, what was controlling Gaza, what was driving Hezbollah, Am I glad that these organizations have been weakened? Am I glad that Iran has been struck? Yes. I'm an American patriot, a Christian realist, and I believe these were forces of evil in the world. And yes, there are people in the Middle East who just want to live their lives free of religious oppression of the kind that Iran encourages and spreads. But we can't be stupid, and we need you. Whenever you're negotiating with somebody, you need to know what their motive is, what's driving them. Even if you're negotiating the purchase of a car at a car dealership, what does that salesman want? What do I want? How do we find common ground? It's very difficult to do with 12er Shiite Islam. So pray, hope that our statesmen have wisdom, hope that we're not engaging in a rush to a settlement for American internal political purposes, because we've done something good. We've struck this evil force in Gaza, Hezbollah, wherever it rears its ugly head, the Houthis. And when I say we need to finish what we've started, I don't mean that we need to kill everybody in Iran, for heaven's sakes. I have dear friends in Iran. I'm an advocate for the Kurds. They're about 10%, 15% of the population in Iran. And thank God they ought to be part of a new Iran. What we want is a new Iran. We don't want a limping clerical government hobbling along weakened and angry, but continuing the devastation and the tyranny that we've had since 1979.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.